Hi, my name is Fred. I'm the head coach at UCLE. Welcome to the Epic Endurance podcast, where we take a deep dive into endurance, strength, and conditioning. Today, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about paratriathlon. I am a USAT Level 2 certified paratriathlon coach, and I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing athletes. I think it benefits a lot of athletes to understand how para works, and you'll see why in a couple of seconds. First thing is, I think we need to address distances. I know a lot of athletes always look to increasing distances and think that the longer the distance is superior. This is not really the case. Different distances require different training and often are having different rules. The word sprint is a little misused in triathlon, but because normally when we think about a sprint in running, it takes about 10-ish seconds, where in triathlon it takes about an hour. So it's a very, very long sprint, and that's why it is very, very hard. Sprint and Olympic distances or shorter distances are usually done always on the red line, whereas longer distances like a long course triathlon, Ironman, or 70.3 middle course triathlon is done at a more conservative pace, and that requires different kind of training adaptation. Triathlon is an Olympic sport. When we say the Olympic distance, 1.5 kilometer swim, the 40 kilometer bike, and the 10 kilometer run, this applies to able-bodied athletes, and this is the distance you will see in the Olympics. It is very hard, it's very punchy, and very fast. There are other distances and there are other rules, but usually short course allows drafting, not always for age groupers. You do have races that do. When you do youth triathlon in short course, you have drafting rules because it's so punchy that people always stack together. Paratriathlon, under the World Triathlon Organization, WTO, the Olympic distance or Paralympic distance for paratriathlon is the sprint distance. So it's a short distance compared to your 70.3. That doesn't mean that there are no opportunities for para athletes to race in other distances. Ironman does offer entries to para athletes. Different race organizers or organization might also provide different criteria for para athlete to join. But if we look at an international standpoint, the distance is sprint, and under this, most of countries are also following to abide to these rules. This as the distance by default. A sprint distance is a 750 meter swim, a 20 kilometer bike ride, and a 5 kilometer run. Usually all done all out. Paratriathlon is a heavily regulated sport. It is not because someone is disabled that they can compete in the sport of paratriathlon. There are different categories, and people have to fall in these categories to be able to compete at an international level. And then in some countries, or also in Ironman, you do have a kind of bucket category, which is the adaptive division. The adaptive division is usually non-competitive. This division, the adaptive, is more flexible, and it really depends on the organizer of a race how much subcategory in the adaptive division that they want to do. Formerly, the adaptive division was called the open division, and it really means what it is. It's a division who's a bit more open. People that don't fit in the criteria of the very strict selection in paratriathlon can fall back into the adaptive. Now, in the adaptive, you will have, in some races, an adaptive division for people in wheelchair. You'll have an adaptive division for people that can walk, and ATD1 visually impaired for people that are racing with a guide, and that don't fit the exact description for the other division. The adaptive division is often broken in two, so you can have ATD1 and ATD2. Often in the ATD2, some people with Down syndrome, autism, and other neurodiverse athletes can fall back into. ATD3 can be athletes that don't fall into normal categories, might be PTSD and so forth. ATD4 might be duo racing. People, for whatever reason, want to race as a duo. Maybe someone is, again, having issues, psychological issues with one of the leg of the race and needed a partner. That can be done. And there's also another division in some countries and the States called ATTMI, which is the Adaptive Triathlon Temporary Mobility Injury, which are for athletes who are suffering an injury that is temporary and still want to race, and they can enter this. Honestly, I don't think that happens very often. Most of injured athletes should rest. If it's something that's temporary, maybe backing off, but this is a division that has been made for them. I don't know how long this division will stay, but it exists. Falling back into the official division in the sport of paratriathlon. First, we're going to talk about the World Triathlon. In the first division will be wheelchair 1 and 2, and usually in paratriathlon, the lower the number, the more severe is the impairment. So this is called paratriathlon wheelchair 1, paratriathlon wheelchair 2, PTWC 1, PTWC 2. PTWC 1 usually don't have core control, whereas PTWC 2 may have some core muscle. And this difference might help them generate a bit more power during their racing. They race with a wheelchair. They also race with a racing chair powered by their arm. So this is not a recumbent bike. In the PTWC category, the athletes swim with their arms, cycle with their arms, and run with their arms. So everything is done with the upper body, because most of them don't have any control over the lower body. These are two different categories, but for PTWC athletes, PTWC 1 starts a bit before PTWC 2, but they all fall into the same race. Of course, men and women are separated. Group number 2 is going to be what we call the ambulatory athletes. Now, ambulatory athletes are people that have legs or can use one of their legs. We're talking about maybe above the knee amputee, below the knee amputee, severely impaired cerebral palsy, congenital limb deficiency. For the paratriathlon standing or ambulatory category, which we call PTS 225. PTS 225 are for athletes that will race with an upright bike and will use run prosthetic when they run. The lower the number, the more impaired these athletes are. So PTS 2 is more impaired than PTS 3. In PTS 4, for example, you will have below the knee amputee, whereas in PTS 2, you will have above the knee amputees or double leg amputees. In PTS 5, well, you can have an athlete that has some mild impairment or congenital deficiency in their foot, and therefore they need crutches or they need some help. They can use prosthetics. Changes in the bike, all the changes they do on the bike have to be approved by a World Triathlon organization. And all these categories start at different times. So PTS 2 starts with PTS 2, PTS 3, PTS 4, PTS 5. And like the wheelchair athletes, these are 4 different races. And then you have the visually impaired, so PTV 1 through 3, whereas PTV 1 is completely blind and PTV 3 is partially sighted, people that have some field of vision. These athletes race with a guide, so they swim with someone, which is tethered by a thread, and then they will ride on a tandem bike, whereas the guide is leading the bike and they're in the back, and they're running in tethered to the guide during the run. A quick note on PTS 225, the reason why there is no PTS 1 is that PTS 1 basically became PTWC, which is the wheelchair athletes. The impairment was so high that they cannot stand, so you do have that. Like we mentioned before, you do have these 3 main blocks, PTWC, PTS, and PTVI, and then you do have the open division in some countries, now called the adaptive division, which can be further broken into different parts. Now, as you can imagine, in paratriathlon, especially for wheelchair athletes or ambulatory athletes and visually impaired athletes, the visually impaired have a guide with them all the time. But for the wheelchair and the ambulatory athlete, transition is not so simple. Race is not so simple, but transition is not so simple. So that's why many of these athletes have what we call a pre-transition in many races, where they exit the swim, then they might be able to have crutches or have a first wheelchair or some form of help to help them go toward transition where they can use their equipment. This pre-transition is still pretty regulated, of course, because this is an Olympic sport. So for PTWC, we can have 1 or 2 personal handlers, and PT standing 225 may have 1, but I think it's really, really rare. No handler is possible for PTV1. They have the guide to help them all the time. Also in races, when some athletes do require some help to get out of the water, they use different color caps, and the race volunteers are usually trained to know what they should do when they see the caps to help them go through this pre-transition, where after this they can move on into transition. The wheelchair athletes do not have to do like many athletes where we have the mounting line. They'll go through transition into their wheelchair, they will stop at the mount line. This is to prevent them from racing directly from transition, and then they will start pushing after that. Again, this is being pushed with their hands. If you think about recumbent bicycle, these are allowed into the adaptive division, but they are not allowed into the Olympic sport of paratriathlon. Obviously, there are many other considerations when training with paratriathletes or being a paratriathlete. For example, body regulation might change when people have impairments or missing a limb. The way that the body regulates temperature is different than if a person is different from normal athletes. Normal. Like we mentioned, for many ambulatory/standing athletes, they will do and modify their bike to be able to accommodate for their missing leg. Some of them will race with on the bike with running prosthetics. Some will use a special one. They're different kind of running prosthetics. Some of them have a knee, some of them don't. Even for above knee amputees, having a knee on the prosthetic might allow for a more normal gait, whereas having no knee will probably have a gait where the leg is passing to the side. These are all considerations that the athletes have to look and feel and go and through what is comfortable and can help them achieve best performance. Now, these athletes also are, at the Olympic level, are very fast, and every second counts, so they're trying to see how to maximize their time through transition, because transition is very important since this is a sprint, and obviously through the bike and the run and the swim. My takeaway on this, first, I think it's good to understand that like all of these athletes are training with impairment and have to modify the way they train with their coaches or by themselves, modify their swim stroke, modify the way they run, modify the way they ride to fit their impairment as well as possible. This should be inspiring. That's my point number one. Point number two is that for many athletes who suffer injury, it is still possible to practice triathlon or multisport, and there are many opportunities and races and organizations willing to support athletes to stay active at all levels. I hope that this small video shines a little light on the sport of paratriathlon, or at least understand a bit how the division work. I hope that you will have the chance to watch the next Olympics and maybe pay a bit attention to the paratriathlon and all these organized chaos that happens during division and with all these different categories, and understand the staggered start for the wheelchair and for the visually impaired category. And yes, hope you have a great day. If you have any question, please feel free to contact me.